Welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering from ELD's Time Vault games. This is our ELD Legacy Open $50 buy-in events that we do every month. Huge prizes and 100% payout of the entries as credit, plus this stunning leather playmat for our champion. Sun Zenith for Dryad Arbor. Such a strong play for these type of depths decks. Green Sun Zenith or Mox Diamond, allowing for a turn 2 3-drop, which can be just devastating. So many quality options in the deck. Just puts you ahead of the curve, and it's actually like really hard to interact with as well. You know, once they're playing a Green Sun Zenith, like Force of Willing it, you're down a card. That's not really great, and they still presumably have the thing that they were going to be casting in their hand anyways. Of course, the later the game goes, Green Sun Zenith becomes a toolbox card. Very similar to pondering and finding exactly the creature that you want on that turn. Thoughtseize sees a hand with a single threat and some removal. Some mana. Would be reasonably well balanced. Probably would have rather had another threat instead of one of those lands. Rob may be able to him with just a couple of answers. Potentially be handled at his leisure. If your opponent literally just only has answers in hand. No obligation to play a threat. Get rid of the additional discard. With duels on board, this Death Shadow list only running a pair of dual lands, an Underground Sea and a Volcanic, makes it an excellent choice for established commander players. Defensive part of it you will already have if you have your playset of duels for commander. Baleful Strix, kind of a pain. I mean, this card is going to trade with anything that turns sideways to do damage, but Elvish Reclaimer, his most damaging thing is tutoring out of the library, so pull together combo of Thespian Dark Depths all by itself. Rob does have the snuff out to handle it. And a Death Shadow played into this removal. App Excavator. A little surprised by playing the Death Shadow there. May just have a whole bunch more threats. I believe they were both prismatic endings, so were I in Rob's shoes, I would probably just look to rely on Murktide, even brainstorm back the Death Shadows once I know my opponent's just sitting there with 2 prismatic endings on hand. It's not like Naya Depths is going to be utilizing their card selection to exchange those for other options. Whatever they draw is what they've got to play with. Storm. Here, like digging for Murktide would be kind of the easiest pivot. Especially if you're not under pressure. So at this point, this Raminap Excavator does represent a very serious threat, both to Rob's life total and the fact that these wastelands can just keep coming back. Wasteland just destroying this mana base. Outland Liberator. And Wasteland Recursion is a major problem. Baleful Strix actually trading Elvish Reclaimer. This is really the noose tightening here. Matic ending gets rid of that less Death Shadow, and that's a wrap. Yeah, Murktide really was kind of the whole game there. Needed to find a Murktide. Unable to do so. Feels very similar to the earlier builds of Death Shadow, with Gurmag Angler being so important in many matchups. Go after your life total. Burn. Trying to win with Delver is not where you wanted to be, and you also didn't want to take any damage early. Try and enable your Death Shadow, so you basically turned into a deck that just cantripped a whole bunch and got out a Gurmag Angler, and that was sufficient. Killed their creatures, Fatal Push, MVP there. But Naya Adept's not as aggressive as Burn, and quite frankly can do all of the damage in just a single shot, so very interesting matchup. Raider. Type of card that I like to see added to the format, just a new addition. Very reminiscent of Asali Pride Mage, but seemed to be stronger. Daybound ability gives it a little bit of extra. Slightly easier mana. White mana, Asali Pride Mage instead of that colorless Liberator. Just a little bit easier to cast. All right, so John on a mull here. But up a game. Thoughtseize for Rob. He's a pair of Green Sun Zeniths and a Knight of the Reliquary. So again, this first turn Dryad Arbor is possible. If he remains with both Green Sun Zenith, that'll almost certainly still be the play. If he loses one of them, it'll be interesting to see how he chooses to play it. He might opt to go a little bit slower. Yeah, so now this is a play. Let me know what you would do. Would you still go ahead and Green Sun Zenith on the first turn, or would you save this to be able to grab something with a little bit more punch, like an Elvish Reclaimer, for example? He is going to make, probably, I'm guessing, the more popular line of just taking it now, getting that on board, able to curve out. Oh, interesting. This did not jam. Playing around days. Right. So opting not to just jam Knight of the Reliquary and eventually have it get dazed. So far, Rob has Thoughtseized and armed. May be able to assume from that he has a hand with all sorts of interaction but no threat. And drop, playing Ponder. I think a Death Shadow made its way into his hand. Are just getting stalked for an eventual Murktide if it comes to that. Low enough that Death Shadow can come out. Ready, Force a Will. And Daze gets pitched, which is understandable when your opponent's playing that hard around Daze. Be best to pitch it to Force a Will, though we see that other splash of red. Rob's hand for the other force. Be unmistakable. Expressive Iteration. Key card from Strixhaven. Anytime that you're getting a 2-for-1 in Delver style decks, and I enjoy that type of magic. I think it's really interesting to be able to incrementally improve, make all of those decisions about which cards to keep. good players can disagree about how best to play the cards. Death Shadow swinging in for a pretty big chunk of damage. That, of course, is the namesake of the deck. Swords to Plowshares takes it out. It at least got a hit in. It always resets your life total to 13 when it gets swords, making multiple Death Shadows a real liability versus decks with Swords to Plowshares. That can be an absolute blowout. If they just swords your Death Shadow, you're right back having 0 board presence as the other one dies to state-based effects. Murktide, similarly, if it gets swords, may push that Death Shadow into the negative. You just have to be careful when you're playing against swords decks to not allow a single Swords to Plowshares just straight up Wrath of God your side of the board. Those Baleful Strix still chipping in there. Prismatic Ending takes out this Death Shadow. Another Baleful Strix. Haven't thought a ton about Death Shadow's place in the meta. I've played it a lot in previous metas, but since the printing of Prismatic Ending is an interesting question. I mean, it's certainly a very strong deck. I really like the fact that it can be played without a ton of dual lands. Makes it very interesting for people playing without the seemingly limited resources some people would think are necessary. Honestly, Legacy is the type of format that can take a long time to fully immerse yourself in, but you can absolutely get a deck built on a budget. We've done a whole budget series here. Rob, for example, playing with just 2 dual lands, putting up excellent results with it in his playing, and able to work towards eventually getting more and more duels where you can play the entire format. Though Death Shadow is actually not, I would not classify it as like a budget deck. I mean, it is a deck that happens to be budget. Rob might actually have all the duels he needs. That would not surprise me. Be able to play whatever Delver variant he chooses, but it does happen to be something that, you know, if you only have the 1 Underground and the 1 Volcanic, you can play a fully optimal list. Awesome things about that. Pure variety. What's possible. You wouldn't necessarily know it from looking at online Magic Online results. Actually venture out and play in paper. Man, there are just so many awesome decks. All of these games playing out in a very similar cadence. We've got this turn 1 Green Sun Zenith for Dryad Arbor. Rob, leave about to Thoughtseize here. Yeah, Thoughtseize. So a whole lot of lands, Endurance and Prismatic Ending. Endurance is taken, leaving just the answer. Thespian Stage, but just a Dark Depths away. Create a 20/20, and Knight of the Reliquary could pull that together very quickly. One more land would do. Even with the lands on board, this could potentially turn into a Yavimaya, then Dark Depths. You only need 3 lands when you have Yavimaya, as Dark Depths can tap for mana. Rob has the Snuff Out, however, and then John has another Knight. This one, Force Pitching Force. What a slugfest. Card is Forced Pitching Force of Will. It can't feel too bad about itself. I mean, there's not too much more a card can do for you than draw 2 Force of Wills out of your opponent's hand. And Plague Engineer, taking out Dryad Arbor. Wow. So setting John back a mana with this 2/3 Death Touch. Not a super exciting card in the matchup. So getting rid of Dryad Arbor is something. Trade with anything on the ground. Or just get aggressive. Getting after it. of previously seen cards there. Try and queue them all up. Those of you learning the format, Wasteland. Out one of these. Here, got Prismatic Ending. Tabernacle. Goes along with the mana denial strategy. Rob seems to have enough mana, just actually needs a threat. Be considering whether or not to fetch, and he does. Oh, I guess considering which card to fetch. Death Shadow, a 10/10. That meets its end very quickly with a Swords to Plowshares going back up to 13. Green Sun Zenith. Elvish Reclaimer. What a back and forth match this has been. Fatal Push answers the Reclaimer. Again, an unchecked Reclaimer can actually just win the game on its own. Minskin Boo meets a Hydroblast. The Baldur's Gate Planeswalker does have red in its casting costs. Actually, just wrapped up on a CEDH Open, the winning deck running Minskin Boo. You have infinite mana. Actually, his -2 ability to just keep pinging himself, casting him from the command zone. So with infinite red and green mana off of, say, a Dockside Loop, actually just draw your whole deck. Not hard to win from there. But Hydroblast actually taking out Minskin Boo. Wow, Pyro and Hydro. Classic Foglio art here. Back to Ice Ages. Dueling. Death Shadow. Just a 3/3 right now. This is a 2-turn clock. Both players largely out of resources in hand. I am a little surprised by that Wasteland. Very interesting. Wasteland taking out one of those duels. What the consideration was. Seems possible that a Dark Depths could be part of the mix here. That 1-turn opening, but no. John extends the hand, has a Veil of Summer left in the grip. This was not useful there in the end, as Death Shadow in a real back and forth slugfest. Best Naya Depths.